let's keep going. So at the top of this lesson, I asked, did you notice how there are two tokens for each name? Yeah, we're going to talk about that now. Okay, so when people minted their PPBL 2024 token, you actually minted a pair of assets. And if you've been working through the course, you've already seen some of how this works. In lesson 203.3, right here, we showed you that what we're talking about are token pairs that implement some of the SIP 68 standard. We're not implementing the whole thing, and I'm not going to go into the details of what we're not implementing right now. But we are playing with the essential idea that when you mint some dynamic token, like the PPBL 2024 token, one emerging standard is that you can prefix one of your tokens with 100 and the other one with 222. Then you can send the 222 token to somebody's wallet. And you can send the 100 token somewhere else. In this case, we're sending the 100 token to a validator address. And each of those 100 tokens is stored in its own unique UTXO at that validator address. And why is this interesting? Because in each of these UTXOs, we can also place some datum. And then we can use a smart contract to make sure that only the person who holds the 222 token can update that datum. And this was the assignment earlier in the course. In assignment 102, the title of the assignment was Change Your Lucky Number. When your token was minted, that lucky number was automatically set to 2024. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to use a Maestro query to look at the on-chain data and find out how many students were able to complete this assignment. This is pretty cool. We're looking back at some of the results from earlier, and now we're going to find out what the blockchain says. Are people who mint tokens completing assignment 102? Let's take a look. Let's go look at the live example. So back to this page, where previously we looked at SLT 204.1. There's also right below that a demo for the lesson we're now looking at, 204.2, Maestro. And it works the same way. I can click the button, and when I do, it fires off the query. What we're looking at here is the datum that's on chain for each of the tokens that has been minted. And in this datum, this bit right here is where the lucky number goes. And if I look at this list, you can see that we're still just getting started with Plutus PBL, because as I scroll down, I can see that most people have not yet changed their lucky number. So here's the challenge to everybody, right? Oh, demo 3 did. Demo 3 changed their number to 28. 28 is one of those unusual perfect numbers. And if you don't know what I mean, just look up online, what's a perfect number? And that's a delightful little mathematical detour. But I digress. Let's keep scrolling. Who else has changed their lucky number? Love is Real changed their lucky number to good old 69420. Very nice. My Token changed it to 2025. Shrey changed it, nice job, to 108. And for now, is that all? Yeah, okay, so we have 4 people so far who have minted a token and completed assignment 102. Obviously, we want to keep growing from there and make sure people are getting hands-on and accomplishing these things. But this is the data. And here's the on-chain data to show how far people are going. So how did we get this data? Well, we used a Maestro query. Here's the example code. And because I just took so long to go through the first example, we don't have to look at everything here. So for example, I'm not going to talk about using API keys again. This is coming from the same place as before, but I do want to highlight a few things that are different. One thing that's different is that instead of using Axios, we're now using something called Maestro Client. Instead of using the general purpose Axios library that can work for any sort of API call, we're using a Maestro client that is provided by the Maestro team in their TypeScript SDK. And if I look at the source code, I want to go back to the source for this project. I'm going to look at package.json just to show you that maestro.org TypeScript SDK is installed. And anybody can install this in any project by typing npm install and then this string right here. Now, this is a very, very nice tool because it allows me to focus on using just the Maestro part, and I can configure it very quickly. Okay, yeah, I've got my API key and I want to use it on the pre-prod network. If I ever go to mainnet, I could change this word to mainnet, and now I'll be using Maestro on mainnet. I set up the same hooks as before. We've got a data hook, and we've got this toggle one, right, that triggers when I press the button. But this time the data type is UTXO with slot. Just like before, it's a list, right? We had a list of assets before. Now we have a list of UTXO with slot. But here's another difference from the previous example. This time I'm not defining the type myself. I'm importing it from somewhere else. And that's very convenient. If you're learning TypeScript development, you might be aware that defining your own types takes a lot of time. If you use a library like TypeScript SDK, now you're just reusing the work that the Maestro team has already done. And this is very nice down here because we're in the previous example. Let me just toggle back to that for a moment. In the previous example, I needed to know what type to expect from my Axios request. So I had to define this type right here. In the second example, I do not have to define the type of res because I'm using a Maestro client. I'm using addresses on this Maestro client and then UTXOs by address. And because I'm using this built-in method right here, this already knows what type res is going to be. What type is it going to be? Oh, it's going to be UTXO with slot. So using these third-party libraries can save me a lot of time when I'm building a TypeScript application. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Hey James, I have a question.
Yep.
I,
Hey,
I just
Stephen.
wanted to, hey, how's it going?
Yep.
I just wanted to, I guess, clarify. I haven't made it this far in the course yet, but essentially, Maestro and Block Frost do essentially the same thing, just different syntax.
Yeah, they are almost interchangeable with each other. And I say
Gotcha.
almost because I recommend playing with both. I think
Okay.
most people will have a preference, but I think preferences are split 50-50. You just have to find out which one you like better.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. So we've got this. And what I'll show you in the next lesson is that mesh makes it even easier to switch back and forth. We'll get there in just a sec. The rest of this example, there's not much more to say because we covered it in the previous example. Okay. Down here, we're going to map over the results of our query. And this time, we're interested in a few things at once, both the name of the asset and the datum. So back here in the example, you can see right here that we've got the asset name, and you can see right here that we've got the datum. The asset name is coming from right here. This should look pretty familiar based on the prior example, but notice this time I'm not taking substring 56. I'm taking substring 62. In other words, I'm chopping 6 more characters off the front of that hex string. Why? Well, because the first 6 characters were either going to be 100 or 222. Now, wait, you might be thinking, wait, 100 has 3 characters in it, not 6. You're right. But a hex digit takes 2 characters to represent a single character. Okay, so 100 is 3 digits for us, but it's actually a 6 character hex string. The number 100 in hex is 31 for 1, then 3030, right? 00. And 222 as a hex string is 323232. And you can see this by playing around with the queries. And I recommend you just get familiar with a little bit about some hex conversions because you'll find that you start to recognize a few patterns in there. Okay. So I'm chopping off those first 3 digits because I know they're going to be the same every time. And now I can just see the name of the token, the part that follows those 3-digit number. Then right here, the next bit is once I have that token name here, we're just going to JSON stringify the datum itself, the inline JSON part. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go too much deeper into this because just like with the block frost example, your task is to get this running locally, right? Try to run the thing locally by making sure that you make a Maestro account and you pull an API key into your .env file. You'll know you're successful if you can see the data on the screen when you're running locally. So my local example is still going. You can see I have it set up correctly because I have my .env file correctly configured. If you get stuck on this step, this is a great place to reach out for help. I'd love to make sure that you can do this, but I don't want to tell you too much more right now because I really want you to try this on your own. Okay. So that's the task. And once you have this running, once again, for example, you can uncomment this line to just see the raw data of the whole request. And if you do this, it's going to help you learn more about exactly what, in this case, Maestro is providing. Now, there are a bunch of other tools for looking at query results. I wouldn't recommend always relying on this method. I like to use this method sometimes just to make sure that my app is wired correctly. I might do this to say, okay, yeah. Is the data coming through properly? Yes, it is, right? But if you're just testing queries, there are other tools like Postman. I just said the word Postman. What's Postman? It's an API platform that just allows you to type in a query endpoint and look at the results without the need for any front end. And this is really helpful if you're just starting to understand how API queries work. So on your own time, you can explore this. And there's other competitors to Postman that do the same thing, just with slightly different features. So you can explore that. But for now, I think we've got enough. All right, so make sure you read about the TypeScript SDK and about Maestro. Now, I mentioned in the lesson here, there's actually not yet a lot of public documentation for Maestro's TypeScript SDK, and I'm not sure exactly what their plans are for providing that, but it's still awesome that they created this, and I'd like to show you briefly why. I'm going to jump back over to VS Code and I'm going to open, really I could do this from any file, but right here, this is the query token datum where we set up our Maestro client, right? Now here's what's amazing about an SDK like Maestro TypeScript SDK. I can create some new variable. I'll just call it X. And then I can say X is a Maestro something. And when I press dot, look at the magic. Oh, I spelled it wrong, so it didn't work. Let's try this again. And there we go. Now it's spelled correctly. And if I press dot, look at this amazing thing that happens. Autocomplete pops up. What can a Maestro client do? All of these things. And if you've ever been looking for a little rabbit hole to go down on your own, here's one. Just play. See what you can do. Get your Maestro API key, pull in the Maestro TypeScript SDK, set up your Maestro client like this, and then just explore. Maestro can do stuff with transactions. Cool. What can it do with transactions? Dot autocomplete. All right, it can tell me the transaction CBOR, the transaction info, the transaction out by TXO ref, and so on and so forth, right? And you can just see what each of these things does. We were just using addresses down here, UTXOs by address. And that's one of the options in this list. Cool. But what if I wanted to see, ooh, what about just transactions? Could I do that? I sure could. All right. And now I can also look at the type of this thing. There's a few ways to do this. One is to mouse over it and see what the documentation says. But also I can right click on a method like this, and then I can click on go to definition. And this opens up the source code for this method in my node modules directory, right? So the Maestro TypeScript SDK, when I run npm install, all of this code, look, thousands of lines of code are just pulled into my node modules directory. Nice. And I don't have to write all these lines of code because now they're already here. And I can just use them by doing what I showed you right here. But remember, at any time, I can go to definition. And this, in my opinion, is even better than the documentation they could publish online. Okay. So yeah, at this moment, Maestro TypeScript SDK, I couldn't find public docs for it. If
Yeah.
you can, great. Let's look at that. But it's
So
already right here built in.
can you hear me?
Nelson, yeah, I can hear you're very soft.
Oh, am I audible now?
Yeah, got you.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think there will be any more documentation as the SDK because it is structured the same way as the API documentation. So you
Perfect.
can see the API Maestro docs and the SDK just follows that pattern in the same manner.
Nice. Okay. So right, there's not even a need for this. And that's one of the notes we have here too. So jumping back to the lesson, um, whether you're right or not, I agree with you. Like, right, like we've already got these docs. And so UTXO is by address, that's the name of the method. And like Nelson just said, you can look at the documentation for this directly. Anybody else have questions about that? Okay. So play with this, and I hope you have a good time. As always, questions, you can bring them to Gimbalabs Discord, you can bring them to these live coding sessions, or you can chat about it right here, right on the lesson page.